أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من شر الشيطان الرجيم. أفضل الذكر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا وأولاده المعصومين حجج الله صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. دائما أبدا لا إله إلا الله. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وإلى أرواح أموات علمائنا الأعلام وشهدائنا الكرام وخدمة الإمام الحسين عليه السلام نهدي ثواب قراءة سورة الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد
وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Sister, you can come up here for prayer if you want. صلاه على محمد وآل محمد.
شغالة؟ تأكد شغالة. أنا خلوني هنا. أنا
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، إلها واحدا أحدا فردا صمدا حيا قيوما. إلها واحدا أحدا فردا صمدا حيا قيوما. نؤمن له بالربوبية ونقر له بالعبودية. من يهد الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد كأفضل ما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. وصل اللهم وسلم على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين والشهداء والصالحين وعترة نبيك الطاهرين. عباد الله، أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين وكان الله بكل شيء عليما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
In honor of the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, I thought we would take some time and shed some light on his noble character and the legacy that he left behind. And this subject really begins with how the Quran teaches us to honor our Prophet and honor the legacy of our Prophet. And much of that discourse, really, if you study the verses of the Quran, yes, it was directed towards the immediate community, meaning that those who lived with the Prophet, those who witnessed the Prophet, those who fought alongside him. That discourse is directed to them, but it also provides a general model for behavior and for conduct. There are specifics that are mentioned in some chapters of the Quran, such as in chapter number 49, Surah Al-Hujurat, and chapter number 33, Surah Al-Ahzab. Chapter number 49 is particularly telling. There are specific details that God delivers to the believers as to how to conduct themselves with the Prophet. It begins with the following proclamation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la tarfa'u aswatakum fawqa sawti an-nabi. O you who believe, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet. In conversation, when you speak, it is a proper mannerisms to speak in a lower tone, not to raise your voice. In the following verses, it says not to call upon the Prophet from behind the barrier. Narrations tell us that in the same way that today when you wake up for the Fajr prayer, for most people their objective is to go straight back to sleep as soon as they're done. Well, some people would wake up and the Prophet had not yet emerged from his private rooms, and so they would call out the Prophet's name before it was even Fajr time, so that it would be on their clock, it would be on their watch. Again, God reprimands them and reminds them not to conduct in such a way. But these verses also tell us between the relationship between the Prophet and the people. For instance, in chapter 33, it clearly says, ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله وخاتم النبيين. That Muhammad, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
He is certainly not the biological father of any of you. And there's reasons why this verse was revealed. Number one, the prophet in his life had taken an adopted son by the name of Zayd. Zayd was a young man whose narrations tell us that his family had left him, and so he had no protectors, he had really no one to take him in, and so the prophet agreed to take him in. And he took him in as an adopted son. And many people assume that because he took him in as an adopted son, that the same rules that a biological father has when it comes to his biological son would apply here. And of course, there's a long story behind that. We're not to get into that. But the Quran says that even if the prophet adopts someone, then he does not become the biological father. And this is also furthered by other narrations, other traditions that we have. In one tradition, the Prophet says the following. He says, "Ana wa Ali abawa hadihi al-ummah." Me and Ali, referring to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, are the two fathers. We're the fathers of this nation. So how do you reconcile between these two concepts? One says that he's not the father, one says he is the father. Well, we say that the prophet, the obvious answer is that the prophet is not considered the biological father, but rather he is the spiritual father of the nation. And that's something that I want to zero in on, is the fact that the prophet is considered our spiritual father, our spiritual ancestor. Because many people, biologically, they can trace their lineage back to the prophet. But being part of the prophet's tradition and his heritage doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be part of his biological lineage. Many people today, they trace themselves spiritually back to the prophet. There's a very interesting narration I want to share with you. And this narration says the following. It describes your fathers. It says, there are three types of people that are considered your father. One is the father that conceived you, meaning your biological father. The hadith begins with Aba'uka thalatha. Three fathers, three types of people who are considered your father. Number one is your biological father. Number two, the narration says, the father who gave his daughter to you in marriage. This person is also considered your father, meaning that he also has rights. This father also has rights upon you. And the third is the father that raised you, the father that taught you. You know, in many places, sometimes you find that a father, for whatever reason, whether the father passes away or the father physically is not present for whatever reason, sometimes in prison or sometimes in a different country, it's maybe a refugee situation or torn by war or whatever. Sometimes physically the father is not there. And so people have spiritual fathers and guides who look out for them. Well, that teacher is also in the position of a father, meaning in the same way that you would respect your father, you respect this person, this guy. It's very interesting because even when God tells us in the Quran to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ أَبَاكُمْ. Remember God in the way that if you were to remember God, some people say, well, how do I imagine a God that I cannot see with my own two eyes? How can I imagine a God that I cannot feel? He cannot put his hand on my back. He can't put his hand on my shoulder. Well, the Quran says, in the same way that you see your fathers as a source of mercy, as a source of generosity, as a source of kindness, think of God in that same way, the source of everything that's good in your life. Now, there's no doubt that our biological fathers, they also have rights upon us. Imam Zain al-Abidin says the following in Risalat al-Huquq. And for those of you who know, Risalat al-Huquq is a treatise on rights. The rights of a parent upon a child, the rights of a child upon a parent, the rights of brothers upon one another, the rights of a teacher upon a student, and vice versa. He says when it comes to the father, He says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ أَبِيكَ. He says, when it comes to the right of your father, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ أَبِيكَ فَتَعْلَمَ أَنَّهُ أَصْلُكَ وَأَنَّكَ فَرْعُ. His right, your father, upon you is that you acknowledge that he is your source and you are his branch. وَأَنَّكَ فَرْعُ. فَمَهْمَا رَأَيْتَ فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا يُعْجِبُكَ. It continues, it says, anytime you see within yourself something that you like, we all have traits about ourselves that we like. I'm not talking about being a narcissist. There are certain things certain strengths that you have, that you know are within yourself, that you're proud to have. He says, every time you see something within yourself that you are proud of, فَمَهْمَا رَأَيْتَ فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا يُعْجِبُكَ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ أَبَاكَ أَصْلُ النِّعْمَةِ عَلَيْكَ. Understand, acknowledge, and recognize that your father is the source of that very thing that you are proud to carry within you. That's why it's important to constantly remember the source of where our good character comes from. You know, sometimes we see ourselves in society, and again, I don't mean that you see yourself above a person, but we're very grateful for the blessings that we have. Sometimes we think, well, I could have been in a family where there was absolutely no guidance at all. I could have been in a family where the father is completely neglectful. But the opposite was true, where I was in a family where my father did not accomplish the same things in life. A lot of people who, they accomplish and they go very far in life, they don't necessarily come from families. Immigrants who come to this country and they're able to get their PhDs and become successful in different ways, they don't necessarily come from families where their fathers did the same. But you remember that thing, that accomplishment that you're proud of, it has a source. It didn't just coincidentally fall out of the sky. So, in other words, the Imam is teaching us, really never forget where you came from. A lot of people, unfortunately, when they become successful, you find that the story of success does not end in the greatest way, because they tend to forget where they came from. They tend to forget their heritage. I was speaking to a group of young people at our masjid, some of the youth, and we had a tafsir discussion. And we were reading about Banu Israel in Surah Al-Baqarah. And I said, if you look at the story of Banu Israel, to them, the modern day descendants of Banu Israel, they know their story. They claim their story. Now you read them in the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, you read in the Quran, their story is not so pretty, right? There's the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you read the people of Moses, well, there were some very ugly parts to that story. But they know that's irrelevant, because the modern day descendants, they know what their story is. They know where they came from. They know their heritage, and they never forget their heritage. And a lot of their strength comes from the fact that they know exactly where they came from. If you look at the children, the descendants of, for instance, Holocaust survivors, they know where they came from. They know exactly what happened to their ancestors. They know exactly what happened to their grandparents. And even the ones who physically, they did not descend from Holocaust survivors, because they're part of that larger community and that ethnicity and that faith background, they claim it as if it happened to their own ancestors. And that's where a lot of their strength comes from. And sometimes, for a lot of young people, and this is why the discussion was coming up, because one young man brought up the point that when 9/11 happened, my father, and his father was an immigrant and very, very educated man with a PhD and all of that, but his father was telling his son, don't tell people that you're Muslim. Don't be very open about it. Because it was such a tough time. And that's understandable, because sometimes we're in fearful times, and that pushes us towards certain behavior. But understand that everything that has happened to you in your ancestry, in your lineage, that can be a part of your strength. You really have to claim who you are. You have to know where you came from, and you must never forget where your source is. The only time we fail is if we forget where our heritage is. And we have the greatest heritage. You look at the sacrifice of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You look at the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we have so much content really to be proud of and to attribute ourselves to. So, going off of that, one thing that I wanted to share with you, and this is something that I read, is today, and I'm talking about here in the United States, there's a crisis, obviously there's a crisis in leadership. And that's affected, really, I mean, the source of that, you find it, number one, at the political level, in the political arena. That there truly is a crisis in leadership. And it's very interesting because every time you look at society, if there's a crisis in leadership, there's always going to be crises that reflect themselves at the grassroots level. There's always going to be crises that reflect themselves in the families of that society. When you see corrupt politicians, that corruption begins to spill over into the people. When you see a corrupt leader anywhere in the world, and whether you're looking at now or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, that spills over into families, and families are affected. So there is a crisis today in the country, and the crisis is a crisis of not just biological fatherhood, but spiritual fatherhood as well. If you go to the jails and the prison systems today, many of the people that are incarcerated there, whether male or female, young or old, if you study that lineage, if you study their history, their family history, you find, for the most part, the father was absent. What does that mean? Not just physically absent. Sometimes you can be present physically, but emotionally and mentally we are absent. Part of that has to do with a system where you're working outside for 10, 12 hours and then you come home and the last thing that you want to do is be available for people. But it's in that critical moment where there's a true test of leadership. Because today there are so many distractions. There are so many ways for fathers to become distracted. That's why you turn on the TV and you see all of the weekend activities from it's interesting because we have Thanksgiving here, and Thanksgiving is meant to be when families get together, which it is for the most part, but you find that entertainment capitalizes on Thanksgiving weekend. Usually there is a Thursday night football game in the NFL. There's usually one. On Thanksgiving there's 3 games, and they're spread all throughout the day, so that your attention is completely captured. A lot of movies are released Thanksgiving weekend. Sales, Black Friday sales, right? All of these things and it's okay to engage in them, but to understand that if we continually distract ourselves from our responsibilities, how it's going to affect within our families. There's an example. Now, I give this example. I relate to this example because I grew up in the 90s, and for some of you either grew up in the 90s or you were watching TV. There were if you watch the TV, there were certain figures that were models for what a father should be. For any of you who are familiar with the show The Simpsons, which until today is very popular, what was The Simpsons about? The Simpsons was about a 9-year-old boy who continuously outsmarted his father and outwitted his father. And his father was a clueless man. You would find him either at work, working in a nuclear reactor where he was asleep most of the time, or he was in the bar, drunk with his friends, or when he was at home, he was on the couch in front of the TV. There was nothing else that he would do, constantly being outsmarted by a 9-year-old child with a skateboard. And so a lot of people, they grew up thinking, well, this is the model of the father. There was another model, also appeared in the 90s, and his name was Al Bundy. Some of you probably remember, in the show Married with Children. Now, what was Al Bundy about? Al Bundy was a lazy slob who sat on the couch all day. He was very perverted. His wife didn't respect him, his daughter didn't respect him, and his son was kind of an image of him, in that you can tell that he was trying to do certain things, but his father's laziness had kind of rubbed off on him. And so he was very insecure. He had no idea how to talk to women, for instance. And he was always thinking of how to get rich quick, right? It's very funny and it's very humorous, but also, if you think about it, that planted a subconscious, an image in the subconscious, in the minds of people, that this is what a father should be like. That if your father has weaknesses, you can point out and laugh at him, you can outwit him, and you don't have to truly respect him. And really that model became duplicated in many homes in the United States, and that's where the crisis comes from. When we disconnect from our spiritual heritage, when we don't have sources of guidance in our life, when the very person who is supposed to be the source of guidance and the source of strength becomes someone to laugh at, someone to ridicule, someone to mock, someone who could be outsmarted and outwitted. And even though we have our good times in our lives, but it's unfortunate how, for many people, that was their only model of leadership in the home. That's all they saw. And of course, contrary to that is what we are taught in the school of Ahlul Bayt. The Ahlul Bayt, you look at the members of the Ahlul Bayt, and they were true examples of what a father, and what a mother, and what a brother, and what a sister, and what a wife, and what a husband should be. The way that they should conduct themselves. There are many, many lessons in that. And of course, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in himself was truly the greatest role model of a father, in the way that he treated his children, in the way that he treated his grandchildren. So, with that, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be among those who honor our tradition. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be among those who honor the memory of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to be among those who receive his intercession. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَصَلُّوا عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد، كما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. وصل اللهم وسلم على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين والشهداء والصالحين وعترة نبيك الطاهرين علي أمير المؤمنين وقائد الغر المحجلين، وعلى البضعة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، وعلى صدق نبي الرحمة وسيدي شباب أهل الجنة الحسن والحسين، وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي، أجر الله تعالى فرجه وسهل مخرجه وجعلنا من أنصاره وأخوانه. عباد الله، أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds His holy prophet in the Quran in a number of verses on where he was and the position through messengerhood, and by giving him the position of spiritual fatherhood in his community. In one verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Ya Rasulullah, do not forget where you come from. Did we not find you as an orphan? and we sheltered you, we gave you guidance? Did we not find you in a state of, not misguidance, because the Prophet was never misguided. The Prophet always stood for the proper values and principles. We know that. Even during his adolescent years, during his youth years, during his young adult years. We have many stories that prove that he was a man of his word, he was a man of integrity, of morality. But that the details of the message of Islam were not revealed to him until many years later. Did we not reveal those details to you? وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And did you not come from a poor background, a state of poverty, and we enriched you? We placed those resources at your disposal. Of course, one of the sources of those resources that were at the disposal of the Prophet was the wealth of Khadija. In that very famous tradition, the Prophet says that there were two things which really upheld the message of Islam in the early days. One was the sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and the other was the wealth of Khadija. Those were two very important resources. So the Prophet, it's interesting, some narrations tell us that the Prophet also wanted us to know where he came from. One narration gives merit or encourages those who memorize the lineage of the Prophet to Adnan. And that goes about 20 or 21 generations back. So there's a lot of merit because the Prophet also wanted us to understand biologically where we came from, because biologically where we come from can also be a source of our pride, knowing where we come from. But even more than that was his spiritual ancestry, that he was the descendant spiritually of those many prophets that came before. The Prophet in himself had fatherly character. The way that he dealt with people, even though he was not their biological father, but he did what a father should do for his children in the way that he guided them. You know, there are many different parenting styles out there, and if you walk into any Barnes & Noble or any bookstore, there's a lot of books that you can read about on parenting styles. And it's interesting because one person put it this way. He said, there are parents today, there are lawnmower parents. What does that mean? In the same way that, a lawnmower, what does it do? It clears the path so that you won't be stepping in weeds and all that stuff. Many parents today, he says, instead of focusing on actually building the individual, they focus more time and energy on clearing the path, that there are no obstacles in the path. And of course, that comes out of love, it comes out of concern, which is great to have as a father or as a mother figure. But the Prophet, the way that he dealt with his companions and his family members, it wasn't necessarily to clear the path, but rather to strengthen them so that if they had obstacles in their path, they would be able to overcome those obstacles. They'd be able to overcome those challenges. At the same time, the Prophet had a very loving touch to him. He was a healer. One narration, it describes the Prophet in the following way. And this is actually a description that comes from Imam Ali, alayhi salam. He says the following. He describes the Prophet in the following way. He said, the Prophet was like a roaming physician. He was like a roaming medicine man. In that everywhere he went, he made sure his instruments were heated. Before, they used to heat the instruments. He had heated instruments with him. Not that he literally carried around heated instruments, but figuratively he's saying that he had his heated instruments with him. He had his ointments with him. He had all of the cures, all of the medicines with him. And he would cure people spiritually everywhere that he went. If there are any physicians here, you can get into a lot of trouble if you prescribe something to someone and they don't really need that medication. Some medications, I understand, the doctor has to put their license number on the medication. That's how serious it is, right? So that they make sure that they're not prescribing the wrong thing. Well, the Prophet also made sure that he was not prescribing the wrong thing to the wrong person. And so knowing our children, understanding our children, and again, this goes beyond just our biological children. Some of us were also put in positions where spiritually we can mentor people. Spiritually, we can guide people. Well, those people are also in the position of our children. Remember the hadith. There are three types of fathers: the biological, the one that gives his daughter to you in marriage, and the one that raises you, the one that trains you, the one that teaches you. And so the Prophet, he had that fatherly character. And that carried all the way until he was on his deathbed. We're told of numerous narrations, and the Prophet, he was constantly in a state where he was looking out for his people, to lessen the pain of his people. One narration tells us that during those very final moments, that when the angel of death eventually came to him to extract his soul, that he felt a little bit of the pain, and he asked about this pain. And the angel of death told him that the pain that you are feeling is really nothing compared to the pain that everybody else feels. And so the Prophet said then, remove the pain from my nation and give me the pain. Let me bear that. Let me bear the brunt of that pain. And so he was a father-like figure. His presence, the companions say that, narration tells that when he was born, there was a light that emerged. When he was taken to Halima Sa'diyah, there was a light that emerged, that gave light to everything around him. That there were blessings that came, that all of a sudden the grass and the crops were resurrected. All of a sudden the cows that had been dry of milk, all of a sudden they started providing milk. Halima herself says that when I placed the infants on my chest, that she was able to start feeding because she had also run dry. And that was the purpose of them going to Mecca in order to seek blessings. And they brought back the ultimate source of blessings to their homes, and that was Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so to have that source of blessings as our spiritual ancestor and our spiritual guide is something to be very proud of. We should never forget as a community where we come from. And the biggest or the best example of that source, where the Prophet is the root, is the fruit. Everything shows in the fruit. And the fruit of the blessings of the Prophet came through the model and the example of the Beit, عليهم السلام. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us the intercession of the Beit, عليهم السلام. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He blesses us with the intercession and the light of Rasulullah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen us through him, through his character. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us in this holy month. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ وَصَلُّوا عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Sister, if you'd like to pray next to us here, the men, so we don't have any gap or separation to pray. Thank you. And same thing for the men.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا وأولاده المعصومين بالحق حجج الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. يا مسلم قد أتاك المصيبة مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله الحليم الكريم لا إله إلا الله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله رب السماوات السبع ورب الأرضين السبع وما فيهن وما بينهن ورب العرش العظيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. الله أكبر. حول الله وقوته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
سمع الله لمن حمده. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا ولي العافية نسألك العافية عافية الدين والدنيا والآخرة بمحمد وعترته الطاهرة. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله وخير الأسماء الحسنى لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له
وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الأول قبل الإنشاء والإحياء والآخر بعد فناء الأشياء، العليم الذي لا ينسى من ذكره ولا ينقص من شكره ولا يخيب من دعاه ولا يقطع رجاء من رجاه. اللهم إني أشهدك وكفى بك شهيدا، وأشهد جميع ملائكتك وسكان سماواتك وحملة عرشك ومن بعثت من أنبيائك ورسلك وأنشأت من أصناف خلقك أني أشهد أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك ولا عديل ولا خلف لقولك ولا تبديل، وأن محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله عبدك ورسولك أدى ما حملته من العباد وجاهد في الله عز وجل حق الجهاد، وأنه بشر بما هو حق من الثواب وأنذر بما هو صدق من العقاب. اللهم ثبتني على دينك ما أحييتني ولا تزغ قلبي بعد إذ هديتني وهب لي من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد واجعلني من أتباعه وشيعته واحشرني في زمرته ووفقني لأداء فرض الجمعات وما أوجبت علي فيها من الطاعات وقسمت لأهلها من العطاء في يوم الجزاء إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وأهل بيته الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
The prayer is qasr for Sayyid, so if anyone wants to pray, Imam, just keep in mind that.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا وأولاده المعصومين بالحق حجج الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. يا محسن فلا تاك المفسد أنت المحسن وأنا المفسد وتجاوز عن قبيح ما تعلم مني يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رب اغفر لي ولوالدي وارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا واجزهما بالإحسان إحسانا وبالسيئات غفرانا. الله أكبر. الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
تسبيحة الزهراء عليه السلام. So there will be a just short poem in Arabic, brother Hassan Khalif, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. قصيدة بسيطة وإن شاء الله كلكم عارفينها، وبركة من بركات أهل البيت صلى الله عليهم. أفضل الصلاة والسلام عليك يا رسول الله محمد وآله صلوات صل على محمد
وآل محمد.
أدم الصلاة على النبي محمد فقبولها حتما بدون تردد. أعمالنا بين القبول وردها إلا الصلاة على النبي محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي، صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي، صلوات صلوات
على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
نبينا محمد صلوا على علي.
صلوات على محمد وعلي.
الذهابة لا هي ملاذ أملي. صلوات
صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
والحسن والحسين ريحانة الهدي النبي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
والسجاد والباطل والصادق أصل مذهبي. صلوات صلوات
على محمد وعلي.
والكاظم ثم الرضا ثم جواد الملل. صلوات
صلوات على محمد وعلي.
والحسن العسكري والقائم المؤمل. صلوات
صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
بذكرهم جميعا كل الهموم تنجلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
وصلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي.
صلوات صلوات على محمد وعلي. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. There's lots of food, please. Yeah, تفضل مولانا تفضل. مولانا.